I have here a section from Rav Kapach, which is relevant also. We're talking about what do we expect of B'nai Noach, the humanity as a whole, Gentile society. So we're going to put that on the screen. I wish I still don't have it yet, the Rav Kapach's complete works, his entire Perush on the Rambam, available online. And really, this base matter should have a copy, but we're trying to, I guess we should raise money for that. Other books always seem to take priority when it comes, so God willing, it will happen soon. This is Rav Kapach's introduction to the laws of kings and their wars. And there's not much original material on this page, actually. He just brings Rambams from other places. But it's important to know that the Rambam Sefer Mitzvahs is basically an introduction to the Mishnah Torah, and you can learn a lot about Rambam's intentions by comparing what Rambam wrote in the Sefer Mitzvahs, that introduction, and in the Moreh Nevuchim, which was basically a summation. At the end of Moreh Nevuchim, in the third part, he explains what he was getting at in the Yad HaChazaka, and he actually gives the reasons why he grouped it together. What's the purpose? He looks for more Tamei Mitzvahs, as he is wont to do. So let's look right into here, over here, some essential points about what it means to have a Jewish king. Okay, why is it important? Now, one of the issues that we've brought up before is sometimes the Jewish people are not led by a monarch. Sometimes the king is all but king in name. Best example, Joshua. Joshua had all the authorities of a king, but he was never called Yehoshua HaMelech or HaMelech Yehoshua. He did not pass on his non-crown and non-throne to his descendants, wherever they weren't or were. But we still look at it that way. And the Rambam even says that for certain dinim, a Navi or a Shofet, whatever it may be, is a stand-in. But sometimes we need someone who actually has the authority of a king. And the Rambam will explain that in the Sefer Mitzvahs over here. He says here that, for example, the normal editions of the Mishnah Torah and the count of the mitzvahs say that we have a commandment to appoint a king. Interestingly enough, in Hebrew, the verb is lasim, a typical biblical verb. And in later rabbinic literature, as post-exilic rabbinic literature, it's limanoth, which is a peel of the word limnoth, meaning to count. So that is a biblical shoresh. The fact that it's in the peel, meaning appointment, is something relatively new. So that's the verb he uses here. And Rambam says that in the manuscripts that he had, Rav Kapach had in his possession quite a few manuscripts, it says, Limanoth Melech mi Yisrael, okay? An Israelite king. What's the intention there? It can't be not just stam a king, but a king of Israel. We've said this before. It's been the minhag throughout the centuries, actually, that certain national groups take their king from some other national group. So the Torah gives a few examples. The Mefarshim do. Most recently, the Norwegians did that. That's what you do. While Kavanam Yisrael Shomer Torah Mitzvot. When the Rambam adds Yisrael here, it has to be Jews who keep the Torah. No secular Jews, no Jews who are avowedly anti-mitzvah, no Karaites. And he continues, V'chein katab b'sefer mitzvot asin, Kuf Ein Gimel, that means number 173. The Book of Commandments, positive commandment number 173, he's going to quote him, She'estavinu l'manot alenu melech Yisrael she'achet dibrathenu. Okay? He has to unite us. What does it mean, dibrathenu? That means what we're saying, our intentions, basically. And he tells you, look at the Sefer Mitzvahs there. V'yan higet kulanu. And he has to guide all of us. Okay? Lead. And that's what the mitzvah, the biblical commandment, thou shalt surely appoint upon thyself a king. By the way, alecha, not alechem. Alecha, it's a singular, interestingly enough. One man doesn't make a king, a nation makes a king. Let me see here for a second. Okay. But remember, Sifrei, even before Rambam wrote this, by the way, this translation of Sefer Mitzvahs is Rav Kapach's own. Okay, Sefer Mitzvahs was not written in Hebrew; it was written in Arabic. So there's the usual early translations and the more recent ones. Rav Kapach put out his own, so he's quoting from himself. So it says in the Sifrei, which is the Medrash Halacha, Shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'shad k'nisatam la'aretz lemanoth lahem melech. The Jewish people were given, or Israel was given, 3 mitzvahs when they came into land: to appoint a king. What do you notice over here? This is an essential part in the pamphlet we're writing right now. In the Gemara, okay, it's originally in Sifrei to Devarim. In the Gemara, it's actually these two mitzvahs are reversed, if I'm not mistaken. First, appoint a king, get rid of Amalek, and then build the temple. And there are later than the Talmud, that is, scholars who said that this actually has to be done because you can't successfully build the temple until you get rid of the Amalekites. So the order is important. And you see here, well, actually, if you have a different version of it, so maybe the order is not so malkef, or maybe it's a machlokas, what the order should be. Or as we're trying to argue in the book, the order might not even matter, especially once you've done it first time. It means that just to decide where the mikdash is, and that's the Rambam's opinion, you need a king in order to build a temple, because the king is the one who this eventually can lay down the law and say, we're building it here, and that's it. This decision is final. That's why also you need a king to unite us in intentions and do for everybody. What that means is you're going to have machlokoth. You're going to have disputes and controversies among the people. The king lays down the law, and there has to be someone who ultimately makes a decision. So it seems from this and other sources, God willing, we'll present this fully when the book comes out, it doesn't seem that the order actually makes a difference. It's a technical reason. Okay, let's continue here. Lashon Sifrei Od Sham, and also says in Sifrei over there, Som Tosim Alecha Melech Shetehei Amatho Alecha. You have him upon you. Why? Why do you have to place him upon you? So that his fear be upon you. You have to know that there's, unfortunately, some people don't have a proper fear of God, fear of heaven. Why? Because you can't see God, and it's really hard to perceive him. The way you perceive God is by contemplating nature and his wondrous creations. But many of us are too distracted with, changing diapers and having to earn a living and then just getting enough food and sleep so we're be healthy for the next day to actually get out and, consider the magnitude and the awesomeness of this creation. And then how are you supposed to understand God? But if you have a king, at least he enforced law. He represents God's rule and God's law, and he's keeping everybody in line. And you should know that if you were to step out of line, punishment will follow swiftly. So that's a good thing. That's the point of having a king. And we should also be thinking about him. We should always have our minds on him, that he is the utmost, of glory and greatness. And this thing means majesty. Okay? Our king is just the greatest. By the way, hopefully, if you appoint the one who God has chosen, yes, you understand that he is eminently more qualified to lead the Jewish people than, let's say, you are. Okay? King David, and understand in his day, most people did realize when they were objective about it that, yes, he had a lot of good midos that were befitting of a king. And don't forget how the Chazal say was doing himself, was the one who described a young David to King Saul. Yes, this youngster who could be your musician has all these great qualities. Yeah, think about it. If he has all those great qualities and natural leader and seems to have a lot of siyata d'shmaya, perhaps you should be making him your king. Until we have his status in our eyes is greater than the Nevi'im, the Navi that exists in his generation. That is, if you can imagine the prophet Samuel, who has compared himself to Moses. He's in your generation, but Samuel says, this man, this Saul, is the one God has chosen to be king, not me. Or this David is the one to be chosen. You understand what that is, okay? Imagine a Moses, and Moses himself is now going to be carrying water for someone else. That someone else is supposed to be your king. See, with regards to respect, who gets precedence? The king goes before the Navi. The king is supposed to, whatever. No, everybody is supposed to stand before the king and bow down. The king stands up for no one, except perhaps the Kohen Gadol in certain circumstances. The king is to refer to everybody by first name only. No titles, no last name, no honorifics. Okay, the king is supposed to stick it to everybody, even if that someone is the Navi. V'chol shemitzaveh hamelech hazeh ezet tzivui she'eno neged tzivui torathi. Tzivui torathi. This means Torah commandment. Anytime the king commands something that is not against a command of the Torah, say the king says, build that building. Okay. Normally, by the way, Westerners and people with a democratic mindset, I'm not talking about the capital D, I'm talking about the lowercase d. Okay. Hear this, that there's someone who could just tell everybody what to do, a total dictator. So, yeah, you have to listen to him. You have to fulfill his command. King says something, you do it, as long as it's within the bounds of halacha. Valver al pikudato, someone who does not keep his command. Ve'eno mekayma, doesn't uphold it. What happens? Reshuth yesh lamelech nergo basayf. The king may kill him by the sword. That is, the king has the right to decapitate all of his rebels. This is considered a rebellion. Just as our ancestors accepted upon themselves when with Joshua, Varu, Kol asher yamreth picha, v'lo yishmal divarecha, l'chol asher titzawenu yumav. The people swore allegiance to Joshua, like they had to Moses. And it says anybody who neglects what you say, okay, or won't listen to your words that you've commanded him, he shall be put to death. So any rebel against the Malchus, whoever it might be, okay, he is basically, his blood is upon his head. He is permitted his blood, signed his own death warrant, as long as it's a melech haomed al pi Torah. If this king is standing, is recognized by the Torah. By the way, the Rambam, Rina Halachas, there are many situations where you'd have a melech al pi Torah. This does not apply, therefore, according to the way the Rambam has it, with what? With, let's say, the Hasmonean kings. Why? Because they weren't appointed by a prophet. Okay? But it would apply to, let's say, Yehu and his dynasty, Yeravam, or any Davidian who does come. Okay? Any Davidian is considered as being appointed by the Torah as long as he is qualified. Like Rambam says, HaKesherim, B'nai David HaKesherim. That is, if it's an Orthodox Jewish Davidian king who keeps the Torah, okay, is sufficiently Torah observant and he holds by the Torah, that's what guides him. So he is considered legitimate and he would have this right. And also this would exclude, for example, the Herodians, who were not qualified al pi Torah. So here you have an interesting idea. The Jewish people are to have a king. The king is there to basically lay down the law. Okay, the Rambam says, keep everybody united and lay down the law. Do you know who does not have such a commandment? Gentiles. Now, the Rambam lumps it together. At the beginning of this book, the Rambam says you have to have a system of judges. Okay? The fact is that the Jewish people are supposed to have judges and policemen. Right? There's a whole parsha, Shofatim v'Shotarim. They're supposed to have a judicial system that is also, in part, partially executive and legislative. Okay, our judiciary is also legislative and executive to a certain extent, and that executive is the Nasi, and sometimes the Nasi himself is a stand-in for the king, as we've seen before. And that Sanhedrin is a basis. You can only have a king if you already have a Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the one who, in part, appoints the king. They're the ones who give them a legitimacy. They're the ones mentioned as appointing King David, for example. There's a Zakenim. Okay, 71 Zakenim appoint a king. But it's a mitzvah d'oraisa that we have a group of people who are policing us, al pi the Sanhedrin. The Shotrim listen to the judges. Okay, not the king, by the way. The king has soldiers. Okay, the king doesn't necessarily have, his job is to enforce the laws of the Torah. How do you know what the laws of the Torah are? The Sanhedrin is the one who tells him. Okay, they're the ones who interpret not only they're the judiciary, they're the legislative, and they're also the interpretive branch. Okay? So they have a lot of powers. The king basically just holds the treasury and going to war. The Sanhedrin, by the way, most of the time tells him go to war, unless it's a defensive war, Milchemes Mitzvah, like the Rambam says. The king can't even decide to go to war, but once it is time to go to war, so he's the one who leads the war, and he gets the booty from the war, etc. We're going to discuss that more today. So that's what we have. Trying to say that Gentiles are also given a commandment to have courts. The Gentiles don't need to have a Sanhedrin, let's say a Sanhedrin Gedola of 71 sages of their own. They're just supposed to have courts, whatever it works for them to enforce these laws. And if they live among us or they ask us, we're supposed to show them how to organize these courts. And sometimes we can make Jews their judges, or we could find qualified B'nai Noach, okay, non-Jews to be their judges. B'nai Noach, however, are not told to ever have a king. Oh, it was assumed, by the way, that if you have a nation, that you have a king. But once again, this is a sugya that the rabbi likes a lot. You go see it. There, like the Netziv says, there are certain groups of people that didn't necessarily have a king, an absolute monarch hereditary. Sometimes they had a system where they would choose someone for a certain amount of time. And they'd get together and they'd appoint them. The Roman emperors famously were not familial. That is, an emperor adopted someone who was not his son whatsoever, like, oh, this is going to be my successor. But it wasn't, Ben Achar Ben among the Romans, for example. Alexander the Great, his father was a king. Okay, he inherited from his father and he greatly expanded his empire. But and after he died, he didn't have an heir. But it was mostly like that you have a king. But the Gentiles are not commanded to have kings. However, the Torah also recognizes, Chazal have a rule that if you see Melech Basar V'Dam, right, there's even a bracha to say upon seeing him, right? And part of the standard that they usually say, how do you know that this is a legitimate king, a legitimate foreign king? What power does he have? He could put his subjects to death. Okay, he could put a Mori B'Malchus to death. That was Rav Chaim Kanievsky. When they tricked him, they brought him some guy from Africa, and they said, "Oh, he's the king of some place." And he asked him, "Like, yeah, well, do you have the power to execute your subjects if you needed to?" So he said, "Yeah, sure." So he got up. He said, "Get me my kaput and my hat." And this is the well-known video, and he stood up, put on, dressed himself, and said the bracha on meeting the king. It turns out the guy was a fraud, but still, it was bracha levatala. But the point is, Gentiles are not given such a commandment. Just like the Rambam says, Gentiles are not supposed to have religions. That's something they're not supposed to have. And it's certainly no commandment to have a religion. But in this case, there is no commandment for Gentiles to have a king necessarily, although it might be a good idea, it might be a bad idea. Like the Netziv and others say, it depends on the society. Different societies, basically the type of people you are, determines what kind of government you're going to produce. You get what you deserve, basically. By the way, so that harks back to this whole issue of the elections. The American people have indicated that they're not ready for Marxism yet, which is a good thing, because it usually signals the death of their country. So I'm happy for them a little bit, but you have to watch out. Let's read a little bit about this next mitzvah, and then we'll get on to regularly scheduled programming. I don't know. There's some kings who might have that power, but they're liked by their people. Although there's one place, where they have a king who might have power to do this? Very close by. The king of Jordan has a lot more powers than, let's say, a Western king. Okay? You know what I'm talking about. But the problem is, he probably has many people in his own country who are looking to put him to death. Okay? So you should watch out. Other people have pointed this out. You should expect, just like when they had the so-called Arab Spring, right? Just a few years ago, how many dictators in the Arab world met their end during that time? Gaddafi's gone. Whoever was in charge of Egypt, they even took the, what's his face? I forget his name now. The one who was friends with Rabbi Avi Grossman. They threw him in jail. They wanted to kill him, remember? The Americans overthrew Saddam Hussein. Whatever's going on in Afghanistan and other places, it's a real mess. God willing, the rulers of Iran will be dead sometime today. And we keep praying God should help them and eliminate them. So yeah, that's the way it is. There's a lot of instability. You're king and everything's doing fine until you end up on the wrong side of an assassination. So Rabbeinu says in the Sefer Mitzvahs, this is the thou shalt not number 362, that we are warned, Milamida melech alenu melech ish she'eno mizera Yisrael v'afal pishu ger tzedek. Can't have someone from the seed of Israel as your king. Well, if he's a ger tzedek, he's a real good convert. Nope, disqualified. You may not place upon thyself a man who is a foreigner. He is not your brother. What does that mean? It's a little bit redundant here. Ish nochri, asher lo achichahu. The nochri, the foreigner, is not your brother. Okay? Lo tuchal alecha, ish asher lo achicha. Okay? Or lo tuchal alecha, ish nochri. Redundancy. What does Chazal say there? Lo tuchal alecha, ish nochri. Zo mitzvah lo taseh. It says first, thou shalt not, don't have a nochri. V'chein shar minuim asur shenimaneh alenu b'shum davar midavrim lo minui torati v'lo minui shiltoni adam shehu miklal gerim. Okay, it doesn't matter what position you're giving him, not even kingdom. It cannot be from among the converts. Okay? Ad shetehei imo Yisrael. Once his mother was a Jewess, now, okay, so now it's his father was a convert, but his mother was fully Jewish. Okay, so she was and not she wasn't also descended from Gerim directly. She has born into it. So now he's qualified. The fisha mardi som tasim alecha melech bikar v'chicha Amru kol mesimot shatamesim alecha lo yu ela mikerav achicha. Any positions you have, that's what the pasuk tell you. Any position of authority can only be given to someone who is from among your brothers. Not Sifrei the Medrash Halacha, but the books of the prophets. Okay, this kingdom itself was given to him specifically. Shezachaba David. Okay. It used to be there's a little bit more egalitarian movement or wiggle room within Judaism, whoever the Navi would pick. But now it's permanently given to David. Okay, it says to David and his descendants forever. Okay? Rambam says there is no king for someone who believes in the Torah of our Moses, our master, except from the seed of David. Umizera Shlomo Dafka, and also not just any descendant of David, but also from Solomon specifically. David had many sons. David says, "Thank God I have many sons." Why is this important? From Solomon. Okay, so some say because, well, let's read it. He says, Midrash Tamchuma Parshat Toldot Madurat Buber. In the Buber edition, they have this thing. It has to be, no, Buber was the guy who put out an edition of Medrash Tanchuma. It's considered the proper edition. There's other versions of Medrash Tanchuma going around that are not, let's say, as good as the Buber edition. You're laughing. Well, what's wrong? What's wrong? That's the guy's name. German, Buber. Okay. Why would this be that it has to be dafka from Solomon? Because it says that Solomon himself also was chosen by God to be the king, and he was the one who was anointed. He was anointed also, actually was anointed twice. So it has to go through him now. He's more qualified than all his brothers. And Rav Kapach says, Rambam wrote similarly in the famous Igeret Teman. You've seen it? It's not that long, but you read it. And why the Yemenites approached the Rambam, they needed chizik. They were suffering a lot of things. So he wrote about, don't worry, Mashiach's coming. Here's our beliefs. The Geula will happen. Trust in God. The Chayotzi Bo Ketav Rabbeinu Ferish Mishnot Sanhedrin Perak Yud Lach Alf Hayisoda Shnei Masar Reisham Durati Ha'ara 91. Okay? So Rav Kapach says that Rambam mentions this idea also in Parashas Mishnayos, and then Rav Kapach says something that's kind of interesting. He says, "Sham katafti ki hadgashazo neged hanatzrut shehem yachasim oto ha'ish mizera Nathan ben David." You've heard this, okay? Rambam mentions it has to be specifically from Solomon. Why? Because the Nazarenes claim that Jebus was descended from David through his son Nathan, one of his younger sons, okay, but not through Solomon. Okay, now hold on a second. Actually, this is a little bit more complicated. For those of you who know the Gospels, you'll see that this is actually a three-way machlokes. Okay, three-way machlokes, different psukim in John, Matthew, and Luke. You know these books? Okay, so what's the three-way machlokes? The first thing you open up, if you open up a Christian Bible, you're going to find the book of Matthew. And the book of Matthew begins with, these are generations from Adam to Jebus. And they have this whole thing. They need to connect him to the Davidic line. So they basically copied it out of our Tanakh. Okay? It starts Adam, Sheis, Enosh, like Divrei Yomim. And it goes through all the Davidic kings down to Zerubbabel, who is the ruler of the Jews when they built the second temple. And then it has all this whole list of more Hebrew and Aramaic names going all the way to Joseph of Nazareth, right? And his wife Mary. And that was Jesus's sort of father. That's the way the Gospels open up. That's right at the beginning in Matthew, the first few psukim. That's the first shita. So that's not the one that Rav Kapach is talking about, because there they trace Oso Ish, or they basically shove him in to the Solomonic line. It's in the book of Luke, in the 3rd chapter, after they get past that whole thing with John the Baptist, that was Yochanan HaMatbil, okay? Their first false prophet who told everybody they have to go to mikveh to get ready for the actual Mashiach coming. He was a little bit wrong, but still. And there, it has a different line. And there it says, these are generations. It starts with Adam until King David, and then through Nathan, and a whole other line of names until you get to Joseph. Okay, that's supposed to be his father. That's the second thing. That's actually the second opinion. And the third opinion, of course, is in John, also in the 3rd chapter, which says that, no, he's not born of any human father. He was a son of God. Somehow or other, his mother was impregnated while she was yet, a maiden. Okay. Somehow. So it doesn't really matter where Joseph came from. Even if Joseph was 100% a Davidian, whichever way you slice it, Jebus isn't his dad anyways. So the Christians themselves, they're a little bit messed up. This type of thing that if, you tell missionaries, what am I supposed to believe here? Because it's obvious that he did have a real father, right? Because he's human. Humans have human fathers. This whole idea of the virgin birth is a nonsense that apparently the early Christians created in order to appeal to, let's say, people in the Western world, pagans, Greeks and Romans, who in their pantheon had all sorts of demigods, like Hercules. No, they're about to get married. Okay, in Arusa. Okay, that's just before they got married, before the consummation. Suddenly she's like, "Oh, you're pregnant," and it's that's what the angel told her. Okay, so like I said, the scriptures themselves, their scriptures, are not clear on this matter. Rav Kapach is saying that this is lahotzi milibon of those who are following Luke. But if you follow Matthew or John, it doesn't really help because Matthew says that, it still makes that claim. Okay, so this claim of the Natsrut is only like 1/3 of Christianity saying this. Either way, nowadays they have more, I guess, less idolatrous interpreters and theologians among themselves. The Mefarshim say that really, yeah, in Achinami, Joseph was the actual biological father, that this means this child was chosen specifically by the God or whatever it might be. I don't need to give the teretz because it doesn't really matter. Okay. The point is, I do not know, based on, a little bit, just looking into this matter, if Rav Kapach is correct in this point, that the Rambam says, Dafka, the king has to come from the Solomonic line and not, let's say, from any other child of King David, due to the Christians, because the Christians themselves are not clear on this matter. They themselves have a machlokes. Okay, it's not a unanimous idea in Christianity. I think actually that if I hadn't seen this in Rav Kapach, I saw this earlier when in America, I thought that they're trying to la fuke when Rav Kapach says, when the Rambam says that the king, the chosen king of the Jews, has to come through Solomon, is la fuke, something that they knew about Rabbi Yehuda Nassi's family, Hillel's family, who were not pure Davidians. Okay, they were not descended necessarily from Solomon. They might even been descended from Solomon in the male line. They were not real Davidians qualified for Malchus. Just whatever. Hillel was chosen as Nasi. Remember, there were many Nasiim. The Nasiim of the Sanhedrin throughout the times of the second Beis Hamikdash were not Ben Achar Ben. There's always someone else. They're mentioned in the Mishnayos, the Zugos. And then you get to Hillel, and for whatever reason, they decide Hillel was eminently qualified for this position, and it should become hereditary. And the Nasiut of the Sanhedrin continued in this dynastic system from Hillel for the next few centuries. Okay, it's once you got Hillel, which is, by the way, like right before the first century, according to the Christian count of years, and it went on for a few hundred years like that. Okay, so that's what the Rambam was trying to say. The Nasiim, even Rabbi Yonasi himself, wasn't the prime candidate for, let's say, kingship. If the relations with the Romans had improved in, let's say, Rabbi Yonassi's time, and I don't know, whatever, that things had gotten so good that they would let the Jews have some sort of degree of autonomy and even have their own king, like they did with the Herodians, even a Rabbi Yonassi would not have been qualified to be king ideally. They would have to look for a Solomonic heir to be king. That's what I think it is. I don't think it has anything to do with the Natsrut here. Okay. And sorry we had to invoke all those Christian books, but you should know, it's good to know what they say. You should be aware of what they're saying. And those were written by Jews, renegade Jews, but they did take certain ideas that were common among Chazal back at the time. So you could actually, find Povisham, Mesiach Lefi Tumo, they have what to say. The golden rule, for example, it's basically sort of Hillel's rule, but in the positive instead of negative. What's the advantage of Hillel's rule? What does Hillel say? Ma dasani lachavercha lo tavid. Don't do what the other person doesn't want you to do. Whereas the Christian version is, do unto others as you have them do unto you. That's, I will do unto others, but you have to know first what not to do. First, do no harm. Okay. So that's what the Rambam is saying here. Whoever is not from this descent is the Nachri. Okay? Nachri means someone who is Jewish, but still not from the right family. Lo achicha means someone who's not even Jewish or someone who's not even born Jewish. So you have to say a goy. Goy, of course, is not qualified. The pasuk says, Som tasim alecha melech mikerav achecha. Okay. Lo tuchal atet alecha ish nochri. Don't have a non-Davidian. Nochri means non-Davidian, non-Solomonic Davidian. Asher lo achichahu means from descendant of Gerim. And of course, by Kal v'chomer, you can't have a Gentile king of the Jews. Has it ever happened before? The Jews had a Gentile king. Someone came and we appointed it in classical times. I don't think it ever happened. It ever existed. Who? Herod and his family, like we said. Antipater himself was an emancipated slave of the Hasmoneans. Okay, which means he was of Gerus. Once you emancipate the slave, he's a ger. So that family was not foreign in the sense. They're not goyim. But that was a problem. And Antipater, his son was Herod. And Herod's, I think, grandson was Agrippus, if not son, the son who eventually took over. Okay, or the grandson was Agrippus the first, the one who was actually a good guy. Okay, he was a frum fellow. Chazal liked him, but he realized he was not halachically qualified to be king, so they flattered him. So that was a problem. Okay, so it's not that he was a guy, it's the fact that he was descended from Gerim. No, slaves who are emancipated become Gerim. Yeah, that's what they're saying. By who? By their masters. Yeah, apparently. Antipater was an emancipated slave. And even that, I might not even have been a slave. Okay? It could be, and I have to look at this. This is a little bit obscure. Where did these Idumeans come from? Okay, that's their family. The John Hyrcanus, who was the first Hasmonean king, but not the first Hasmonean ruler, he was the nephew of Judah Maccabee. He forcibly converted a lot of Edomians, or Idumeans as they write in the books. Those were descendants of, Edom, who had moved into Eretz Yisrael during the Babylonian exile. So Edom basically expanded. Edom is the area around, southeast of here, okay? Hovering in what's nowadays the border in the Arava area between Israel and Jordan, up to a lot. So they basically moved it up as far as Hebron back in the day. So they were forcibly converted to Judaism by these Hasmoneans. So they're converted. And then it says they're slaves, right? It means they were servants. They were royal servants, but they were already Jewish. Like I said earlier today, Avram Avinu had slaves, and Avram Avinu had servants and followers. It's pointed out by the Mefarshim. Sometimes the word Eved means what? Let's say you're a farmer, okay? In classical period, even up to the American South. If you own slaves, that means you have people who live in a shack, who mamish do real hard work for you. Okay, you support them and you feed them, but they live like slaves, and they're in eternal servitude, and so are their descendants. And when the king of Egypt has avodim, okay, or king of Bavel has avodim, it doesn't mean slaves who, do his laundry for him and dig his mine. It means his minister of defense and his top generals, right? They're yeah, I'm saying, but it doesn't just mean that. When you're a king with your cabinet, your avodim are also, your number 2 and your number 3. Okay, so Avram Avinu, I'm certain when he first came to Eretz Canaan had avodim. Like who? It says Eliezer was his eved. That was his top man. For a while, Avram Avinu was honestly thinking that for the first 86 years of his life, this eved was his heir, his top servant, his number 2, and his, going to inherit everything he had in this world. So Eliezer wasn't Avram Avinu's servant. If maybe, yes, just like you want to serve your Rebbe, so you'll get him a cup of coffee and stuff. Maybe you'll help him tie his shoe. But he did not work menial labor all the time. Okay? So too, Avdei Pharaoh were his Sar Mashkim and Sar Ophim, Sarim. Okay? For you, they're big shots. But for the king, they're Avodim. So too, the Asmoneans. Okay? The Asmonean kings had slaves. And then they had, people who did important jobs for them. And that's where Antipater, the Idumean, came in. Okay, he worked for the Hasmoneans, and he was basically climbing the ladder until he usurped them. He got so influential and was able to bribe the Romans and all that. That's how he became king. So I wouldn't even say that he was emancipated. Could very well be that his family had converted to Judaism forcibly, but nonetheless converted beforehand. And he was of the servant class to the Hasmoneans, but not even a Kanani. So he didn't need to be emancipated or get shikhrur from them. And that's where Herod and eventually Agrippus came from. So they're from this group of family that had converted to Judaism beforehand. Okay, let's continue. Zeb Barur ve'ein bo safek. Okay, so basically, here's this. Kashem shekol shehu. Hold on one second. Shalom yizera aron linya avoda zar karina bay. Who's a zar? What does zar sound like? Well, you know the halachic term. The halachic term is, yes, a zar basically means someone who's not a Kohen. That's for you, by the way. Okay, someone who's not a Kohen. But it sounds like someone who's like, very strange. Like even a Levite is a zar in this case. The Levi works in the Beis Hamikdash. The Levi guards the Beis Hamikdash. That doesn't matter. When it comes to the service, the sacrificial service, he's a zar. Kal v'chomer, a regular Jew. This is clear, no doubt. So you can look this up in a few different mesechtas. Okay, so that's enough for what Rav Kapach has to introduce us to in the Sefer Mitzvahs. Questions about that? No. Okay. So let's get back to this. You understand now that in Jewish society, are we to have, let's say, constitutional rights? I think it's a good thing. Let's say America. Constitution is a good thing. But as Jews, we don't look at rights. The Torah tells us about our duties to God. And certainly if we had a king, we wouldn't have freedom of speech for a number of reasons. Why? Just freedom of speech. Why does that not go hand in hand with, let's say, an ideal Torah society? Because you can't speak out against God. If you had someone who's trying to tell people, don't keep Shabbos. If you go into America, you're trying to tell people, here, be Michal Shabbos. That's totally within your rights, right? And you wouldn't want that to infringe on anybody's right to do such a thing. But in the land of Israel, a Sanhedrin or a king cannot tolerate someone who's encouraging others to violate Shabbos publicly, right?
What kind of sanctions would this person get?
I don't know, but that's also the Torah, as brought by let's say the Gemara and the Rambam, say that the Sanhedrin, the court, and the king have a lot of leeway in choosing how to deal with people who are disturbing the public keeping of the Torah. Okay, so as they could use all sorts of physical punishments, like the Chazal have extrajudicial beatings, okay, just to keep people in line. Okay? Even if for saying that technically speaking, there are no witnesses, no edim hasra, etc., no due process, they feel like the time calls for it, they could severely punish people. I was asked before, what do we do about a violent rapist? Does the Torah say what to do to a violent rapist? No, it doesn't. No, that 50 silver shekels thing and has to marry the girl, that's talking about non-violent rape. That was talking about, close to seduction. The onus, that's saying the mefata there, the onus there is not what you're thinking. The onus in the field is what you're thinking, in which case a rodef, he's like a rodef, and you mafsilin benafsho, it means you kill him, right? Let's say they have someone who's a violent rapist. What do they treat him? Be like, right now, he's not rodefing anybody. It's done is done. How would a Sanhedrin deal with such a person? Yeah. Okay. Just like a violent criminal. How would Chazal deal with a violent robber? Well, yes, they refer him to the Melech, but what Sanhedrin doesn't have a Melech? Or what would the king do with a violent criminal? What does the Torah say? I mean, I'm talking about a person who uses, guns and knives and does stuff to people. He's a mugger. Okay, so I'm asking you, did you know, look in the books here. The Ganif or the Goslin, a Goslin has to return what he has stolen. Shkoyach. But that's it. It's like, oh, I gozled from someone. Okay, fine. I'm sorry. Whacked you over the head on that street corner the other day and left you for dead, bleeding. But here's your money back, and here's the knossos I'm going to pay, right? They give him malchus. Okay? They just give him malchus. Okay, you could go free now. Just like someone who ate pork. They give him malchus, or someone who's moel. Okay? They give him, he has to bring his sin offering. He has to pay back a lot of money to the Beis Hamikdash, and he goes free? No, that's not the halacha. Okay? If you have a violent criminal, like the Rambam shows, you have violent criminals, rapists, attempted murderers, thieves who use violence. What? The kippah is one example. That what they're supposed to do is use corporal and punishment and physical force to teach the guy a lesson. The Rambam points out, kill him if necessary. Okay? Kippah means extrajudicial death. The king can even go farther. The king say, I'm just going to decapitate you and I'm going to hang you longer past sundown for a few days just to show everybody this is not how you behave. A beis din kills someone, they have to hang him up until Shkia. And if they gave him kippah, that was unofficial death, so they can't even hang him. Okay. But the Beis Din or the king is supposed to enforce the Torah law and know how to use physical force in order to keep would-be violent criminals in line. Okay. That's halacha. So if you have a violent rapist, okay, the halacha is and always was that not that, oh, we have to say like, okay, 50 silver shekel fine and a marriage if the girl so chooses or her father, that's what they want. And Malchus, but that's not what they're talking about because Malchus also is a formal act of penance, right? Malchus is, shilush, and they see how many Malchus can the guy survive, and if he wets himself, so they let him go, right? That's more like a ritual atonement. What I'm talking about is if you have an actual violent criminal, okay, a real like a gangster type, whoever it may be, they don't start thinking how many malchus can this guy take. They really lay it down on him and kill him if necessary. You understand? So that's why I'm saying that's why you have to read Hilchos Melachim and Sanhedrin. Well, it's not tirtzach. When a Beis Din does it, it's a mitzvah. Okay, and like I said, they appoint the guy. If the whoever is appointed by Beis Din was just doing his job, he's putter. If he does too much, that's talking even about basic malchus, right? The Beis Din sometimes says, we're going to have to use force on this guy. Okay, and as Yoni pointed out, the king has in his power if he sees people are breaking the laws, you have real criminals. So the king is supposed to hang many people in one day. Even he has too many criminals to deal with, hang them all. And by the way, I mean, hang them to death like they do in the West world. I mean, chop off all their heads and then hang their bodies. Okay? That's what a Jewish king is allowed to do. We're not talking more about Malchus, like we said earlier. A Jewish society, a proper Jewish regime, does have ways to deal with potentially violent criminals. Thank God we are Jewish, which means what? We barely produce such type of people throughout history. Yes, there have been Jewish thieves and murderers, but thank God, as you can see today, if you have a Jewish community, a whole city, 50,000 Jews, it's probably the least criminal place you can find in the world. And that's the truth, right? Okay, that's what I say. Thank God. You go to a nice Jewish community, you walk among them, and you could be confident you're walking on the street, you're not going to encounter any criminals. You're going to encounter nice people. You come to Kochav Yaakov on Shabbos. Do the police have anything to do here on Shabbos? Is there anybody on the street you have to fear? Yeah, really? The guy who took your scooter. And like I said, my belief is that it was someone not of the children of Israel who came onto the yeshuv because right here, many, you have all such visitors at all hours of the day, and they have the means to take it away. Well, yeah, even in front. They bring trucks in front over here, by the way. Well, truck wouldn't see it, the truck drivers would. Okay, well, I would have that's what I would assume. No trucks coming here. Do you know how often trucks come here? Okay, you know, truck. You went into shul. All it took was the Bamba truck or the milk truck or whatever to come drop off. Sometimes the chicken truck comes here. You know who's driving the chicken truck? Well, not a chicken. Worse. Yeah. Okay. Don't say it out loud, but you should know. Okay. So freedom of speech. Let's get back to this. Even though we would hope that a Gentile society has such a thing, a Jewish society will not necessarily have blanket freedom of speech if it's usser or if it's rebellion against the king. If you want more kids, send for the kids. Okay, if you're talking about sedition of the king or anything against the Torah, you don't have freedom of speech to do that in a Jewish society. A Gentile society perhaps does, as long as the Gentiles, where are they limited to? The one speech the Gentiles are not allowed to have: blasphemy, right? Birkas Hashem. Okay, so you know that this is not a blanket permission here. Let's see what else. And also the Gentiles have very few arayos. Okay, someone asked this question. They're saying that the Japanese have a reproduction problem. The Japanese are frigid. They're not, doing enough pruervu. And they found that they're just many of them are not active enough in this regard. They're saying that they can find 20% of their high schoolers by the time they finish high school have even had a slight experience with members of the opposite sex. Okay, that's a problem in Japan. So isn't that, wait a minute, it's because they're too prudish or whatever it is they're doing to themselves? Do the Japanese have a problem? And does this not bode well for us? Because in Haredi society, you go proper, let's say, Haredi society, how much experience do all the guys leaving high school have? I know there are a few buckers who are, whatever, but it's a very small minority, right? Lower than 20%. Yet, what? Lower than 5%. You were in it in high school. You didn't. You should know. Okay, so like I'm thinking, like I went to a large modern Orthodox, the largest boys modern Orthodox high school in North America, if not even Haredi. Okay, much bigger, maybe the largest Orthodox Jewish high school in America. Okay, maybe at the time. How many guys had real experience in this regard leaving high school? A small minority. There were some, but it was a small minority. So if it's bad for the Japanese, it's showing that the Japanese are not, whatever, they're not maturing and they're not whatever doing what they're supposed to do in order to maintain their population. Does this also reflect bad on us? Does it mean that we're heading for something wrong? And the answer is, like I told him, no, the Japanese are not Jewish. So for them, they should already be, getting ready to multiply. And if they're in high school and they're somehow not, and don't forget, they don't have the halachas that we do, preventing all this type of stuff. If they're not like that, then it shows that, they have something wrong. They're being held back. They're being stunted emotionally or whatever it might be, whatever the sociologists and the other people are studying this phenomenon see. But for the Jews, the reason why the Jewish guys are chaste leaving high school is because they're keeping halacha. But we know that we encourage marriage and proper formation of families right afterwards. And that's why the Jewish population has no trouble. Right? There's the same guy that asked me months ago, why is it that you go to Tel Zion and there are kids running amok in that parking lot where they have the vegetable distribution, right? They're playing with the forklift and everything. And there are a bunch of kids doing this and that at 6 o'clock at night. Why are so many groups of little kids running amok? And you know what the answer is? It's not because the parents are negligent. It's because the adult to child ratio in the community is extremely low. Why? Because they're having a lot of kids. It's a lot of kids around. You have 8 kids in the house. How are you supposed to supervise all of them at once? No, the adult to child ratio is low. It means adult is the numerator, child is the denominator. So you get a small number. If I said the child to adult ratio would be high then, because now the children are the numerator and the adults are the denominator. So that's a good thing. We're different than them.